All right, let's picture it. It's the late 19th century. Science is absolutely exploding. We've got electricity, the telephone, even X-rays. It really feels like anything and everything can be measured and explained. But, for a lot of people, this brand new, purely material world, well, it felt a little empty. Traditional religion wasn't cutting it anymore, and science seemed to be taking all the mystery out of life. So, right in the middle of all that, this other, parallel quest gets started, a movement that wanted to use the tools of science to explore the mysteries of the soul and the supernatural. And that, right there, was the world of French occultism. Now, you look at a diagram like this one, the key to the great arcanum, and your first thought might be, okay, this is just some fantasy drawing. But hold on. The people behind this weren't just doodling. They were trying to do something absolutely monumental. What you're seeing is an attempt to create a grand, unified theory of everything. A single system that could connect the human spirit, the elements, the stars, and the divine into one single coherent map of reality. So how in the world did they even begin to do that? I mean, this is where it gets really fascinating. For them, there was no conflict between science and magic. Not at all. In fact, people like the physician Pappas were convinced they could scientifically prove the ancient teachings of occultism. And they published their work in books just like these, presenting them as collections of facts and experiences. They took things that were just starting to get scientific attention, like hypnosis, and they completely reframed them. See, to these thinkers, hypnosis wasn't some silly stage trick. No way. It was a serious laboratory tool you could use to peel back the layers of the mind and start exploring an invisible reality. And where did they start their investigation? Well, with the most complex and intimate universe they could find, the human being. The thinking was, before you can even dream of mapping the cosmos, you have to start by mapping yourself. And right at the core of their model is this idea of duality. They were certain that every one of us is made of not one, but two bodies. First, you've got the physical body, right? The tangible vessel we can all see and touch. But then they said there's also an invisible, energetic double they called the astral body. And this image here just illustrates their idea perfectly. See on the left, that's the waking state, where the astral and physical bodies are totally aligned. But then on the right, when you're asleep or in a hypnotic state, that astral body separates. It's free to travel in a non-physical realm. And for them, this was not a metaphor. They believed it was a literal, observable process. Okay, so if this invisible self actually exists, how do you go about exploring it? How can you possibly chart its functions and its structure? It's not like you can just dissect it, right? Well, they did it by creating diagrams, like this one. And trust me, this isn't just art. It's a schematic. It's a blueprint for the human psyche. Look at how it breaks the self down into these interconnected parts, almost like an engine. You've got will, intellect, sensation, and instinct, all interacting, all driven by a central nervous force. They were literally treating the soul like a piece of machinery that could be understood. And the master key for unlocking this whole psychic engine, that was hypnosis. Again, this was their scientific method. They were convinced that by putting someone into a hypnotic state, they could quiet down the physical senses and directly access, observe, and even influence these deeper layers of consciousness. This slide just shows how incredibly rigorous their model was. They didn't just see hypnosis as one single thing. For them, it was a methodical journey through 6 very distinct stages. You start with credulity and somnambulism, basically states of deep suggestion. But then it progresses into much stranger territory, states of rapport and sympathy where this deep connection is formed. And finally, it ends up in the truly extraordinary, interior view, which was the supposed ability to see your own internal organs, and sympathy at a distance, which is basically what we would call clairvoyance. Okay, so once they felt they had a decent map of the inner self, the next logical step was to zoom out. How does this incredibly intricate individual fit into the vast machinery of the entire cosmos? This diagram just perfectly captures their core belief, which is the ancient Hermetic principle of as above, so below. They saw these direct, analogical links between the human body and the cosmos. So the brain is connected to the sun, the source of light and intelligence. The body's core is linked to the earth. It's this beautiful vision of the human being as a microcosm, a tiny, perfect reflection of the entire universe. And their map of that universe was every bit as detailed. I mean, look at this. This is their model of the cosmos. Not as just empty space, but as a series of concentric spheres, or planes of existence.
starting from the physical world we live in and going all the way up through astral and divine realms.
So what connected it all? What was the invisible medium that allowed, say, the stars to influence people, or one mind to influence another? Well, they called it astral light, and this chart shows it as the invisible twin to physical light. The best way to think of it is like a kind of spiritual Wi-Fi, an unseen energetic field that fills everything and carries information and influence across the entire universe. So, let's say you have a detailed map of yourself and a map of the entire cosmos. What tools did they actually develop to navigate this incredibly complex, interconnected reality? What they did was they repurposed ancient systems. They looked at the tarot, for example, not as just some fortune-telling game, but as the absolute key of occult science, a kind of symbolic calculator for understanding all the forces at play in any given situation. And as you can see here, they linked it all together with other systems like Kabbalah and the Zodiac, creating this incredibly intricate web of correspondences. And their toolkit was just vast and varied. It had physical objects like talismans, symbolic systems like special alphabets and numerology, and really complex practices like rituals and astrology. But all of them, every single one, was designed for one purpose: to focus human will and consciously interact with that invisible astral light. Here is a perfect example. This is described as an astral image of a dove, and it was designed to be used as a talisman for peace. The idea was that this physical object, created with very specific symbols and intent, would act like an anchor, or maybe like a broadcast antenna, impressing the idea of peace onto the astral light to hopefully manifest a desired effect. So let's just step back for a second and think about what this whole intricate system really represented. I mean, what was the ultimate goal of all this mapping and cataloging? When you look at everything they were doing, it becomes pretty clear this was way more than just superstition. What we're really seeing is a deeply serious, systematic attempt to create what they hoped would be a unified theory of everything, blending science, spirituality, and magic in a grand search for meaning. And that kind of leaves us with a pretty provocative question, doesn't it? Was this entire worldview just an elaborate fantasy? A dead end on the path of knowledge? Or does it maybe represent a forgotten way of seeing the world, one that saw consciousness and the cosmos as fundamentally interconnected? As we look at this key one last time, you really have to wonder, mainstream science definitely took a different path, but these occultists, they believed they were charting the very structure of reality itself. And whether you see it as science or art or magic, it's still a fascinating, lost map of the human soul.